What if I told you that right now, sitting somewhere in a jar, a clay pot, or a wooden barrel, there is food that has more healing power than most things sitting on pharmacy shelves? Not a pill. Not a powder. Not something a lab invented last year with a name you can't pronounce. Food. Real food. Food that has been alive for thousands of years. The human gut holds roughly 38 trillion microbial cells. And every single day, the way you eat either feeds those microbes or destroys them. Every processed snack, every antibiotic course, it knocks something out. Leaves gaps. Those gaps show up as brain fog, bloating, low energy, weak immunity, and inflammation that won't quit. Ancient people didn't have this problem. Not because life was easier, life was brutal. But they were eating fermented foods constantly. Every culture, every continent, every era. Because they figured out, through thousands of years of lived experience, that food transformed by living bacteria makes you stronger. More resilient. Harder to break. Modern science is finally catching up to what they already knew. Here are 20 fermented superfoods from across the world and across history that rebuild your gut, reduce inflammation, and give your immune system the foundation it was designed to work from. Number 1, kvass. In Russia, Ukraine, and Poland, for at least 1,000 years, families have been making a fermented drink from stale rye bread. That drink is kvass. You take dark rye bread, dry it, steep it in water, and let wild yeasts and bacteria do their work. What comes out is slightly sour, lightly fizzy, and deeply earthy. But inside that jar, fermentation is breaking down the rye into short-chain fatty acids that feed your colon lining, producing B vitamins your nervous system runs on, and creating lactobacillus bacteria that crowd out the harmful microbes. Russian peasants drank it every day through brutal winters when fresh produce was impossible to find. It costs almost nothing to make. A loaf of bread. Some water. Some time. Number 2, Tibikos, water kefir. Most people have heard of milk kefir. Far fewer know about its older, stranger cousin, Tibikos. Also called water kefir. Tibikos are translucent, gelatinous crystals, clusters of bacteria and yeast living together in a symbiotic relationship. You feed them sugar water or coconut water. They eat the sugar and produce lactic acid, carbon dioxide, and a cocktail of beneficial microbes. Then you drink what's left. Tibikos have been found in Mexico, the Caucasus, Tibet, and North Africa. No one knows where they originated. They appear to have been passed between families like a living heirloom for centuries. The resulting drink is dairy-free, rich in lactobacillus and bifidobacterium strains, and one of the most versatile fermented foods on the planet. Number 3, doenjang. Korea has given the world kimchi. But in Korean kitchens there is something older, something that sits in large earthenware pots fermenting for months, sometimes years. Doenjang. Fermented soybean paste. Cooked soybeans are formed into blocks, dried, fermented with wild molds and bacteria, then moved into pots with salt and water for a second fermentation. Months at minimum. Traditional doenjang is aged for years. It's rich in isoflavones studied for hormonal balance, contains nattokinase precursors that support cardiovascular health, and has a probiotic density that outpaces most commercial supplements. Korean researchers have published substantial work on its anti-inflammatory effects. One small pot in your refrigerator can last months. A spoonful in soup is ancient medicine dressed as dinner. Number 4, boza. Walk through Istanbul at the right time of year and you might hear a vendor calling a single word down the alleyway. Boza. A fermented grain drink made from wheat, millet, or corn. Thick, slightly sour, lightly sweet. Drunk across the Ottoman Empire for more than 1,000 years. The lactic acid bacteria dominant in boza deliver a living microbial community straight to your digestive tract. Fermentation generates thiamine and riboflavin from the grain, vitamins that were quietly filling nutritional gaps for generations. It was given to nursing mothers, to soldiers, to the sick and recovering. Not as folk superstition. As practical nutrition. Number 5, Catido. Long before Spanish colonizers arrived in Central America, the people of El Salvador were fermenting vegetables in ways European cuisine had never seen. Catido is a lightly fermented cabbage relish, crunchy, tangy, layered with oregano, served alongside almost every meal. The fermentation is short. Just a day or two. Long enough for lactobacillus bacteria to convert natural sugars into lactic acid. Short enough to keep the cabbage crisp and alive. Research on briefly fermented brassica vegetables shows significant increases in bioavailable folate, vitamin K2, and glucosinolates that support liver detoxification. Cabbage, carrots, onion, salt, and 2 days. No special equipment needed. Number 6, Injera. You cannot eat Ethiopian food without eating injera. It's not a side dish. It is the plate itself. A large, spongy flatbread made from teff, a grain native to the Ethiopian highlands cultivated for over 5,000 years. The batter ferments for 3 to 5 days before it touches a hot pan. That fermentation is everything. During those days, wild yeasts and bacteria break down the phytic acid in teff. Phytic acid binds to iron, zinc, and calcium and prevents absorption. Fermentation neutralizes it. What was locked away becomes available. Teff is already rich in calcium and resistant starch that feeds gut bacteria. Fermentation makes it all more powerful. Every meal eaten off injera is a probiotic delivery system wrapped in extraordinary nutrition. Number 7, natto. Japan. Around the 11th century. Someone left cooked soybeans near a heat source overnight. The next morning the beans were covered in a white sticky web. They smelled strong. Someone ate them anyway. Natto was born. The bacteria responsible, Bacillus subtilis var. Natto produces nattokinase, an enzyme studied for its ability to dissolve fibrin involved in blood clot formation. It also produces vitamin K2 in the -7 Malawian Quachas form, linked to cardiovascular health and bone density. Bacillus subtilis is spore-forming, meaning it survives stomach acid and arrives in your gut alive and active. The taste is challenging. Sticky, pungent, intensely savory. In Japan it's eaten with rice and a raw egg yolk. But the health literature on natto is some of the most compelling in the entire field of fermented foods. Number 8, Laban. Across North Africa and the Arab world, there is a fermented dairy tradition stretching back to the earliest days of goat and sheep domestication. Laban. Fermented milk. Thinner than yogurt, sharper in sourness, traditionally drunk cold or diluted with water during hot weather after a heavy meal. The lactic acid bacteria in Laban produce antimicrobial compounds that extended the food's shelf life in hot climates without refrigeration, before anyone understood microbiology. Those same bacteria support the gut microbiome and maintain the intestinal barrier separating your bloodstream from trillions of microbial cells. In Bedouin tradition, Laban was foundational for survival. In modern Lebanon and Jordan, it's still made at home and passed between households as cultural pride. Number 9, Tepache. Mexico. Pre-Columbian Mexico. Indigenous communities were fermenting the rinds and cores of pineapples in clay pots with water, raw cane sugar, and spices. Tepache. Lightly fermented pineapple. Just 2 to 3 days of fermentation, enough to become pleasantly fizzy and tangy, not enough to become significantly alcoholic. The pineapple rind, which most people throw away, is one of the richest sources of bromelain in the entire fruit. Bromelain breaks down proteins, reduces inflammation, and has been studied for respiratory and wound healing support. Fermentation makes it more bioavailable. 1 pineapple's worth of rind, a bit of brown sugar, a cinnamon stick, and 3 days. It's tropical, sour, sweet, and costs almost nothing. Number 10, Puba, fermented cassava. Brazil. The Amazon Basin. Thousands of years of indigenous food tradition built around a root that is mildly toxic when raw. Cassava contains compounds that release cyanide when damaged or digested. But indigenous Amazonian peoples discovered thousands of years ago that soaking cassava in water and fermenting it for several days breaks down those toxic compounds completely. The root becomes safe, and richer, and more nutritious than before. Fermented cassava, called puba, becomes the base for breads, cakes, and porridges. Research has found reductions in glycemic index of up to 30% compared to unfermented preparations. This is ancient food technology solving ancient problems in ways modern science is still learning from. Number 11, Shio Koji. Koji is the foundation of all Japanese fermented food. Every bottle of soy sauce, every batch of miso, every cup of sake traces back to a mold called Aspergillus oryzae grown on rice. That fermented rice mixed with salt becomes Shio Koji. Shio Koji is not a probiotic in the traditional sense, the mold is typically inactive by the time you use it. But the enzymes it produces, proteases, amylases, lipases, remain powerfully active. These are the same enzyme classes your body uses to digest food. When you marinate protein in Shio Koji before cooking, digestion begins before the food ever reaches your stomach. The result is meat and fish with a deep golden crust, extraordinary tenderness, and dramatically improved digestibility. Shio Koji has been used in Japanese cooking for at least 800 years. It deserves a permanent place in every kitchen. Number 12, Pozole. The Maya built temples, developed mathematics, and charted stars. Every day, ordinary Maya people fueled themselves with a fermented corn drink researchers are only now studying seriously. Pozole. Corn masa formed into balls, wrapped in leaves, and fermented for days or weeks with wild bacteria and yeasts. Then mixed with water and drunk, sometimes with cacao, chili, or vanilla. Fermentation increases the bioavailability of niacin, which unfermented corn cannot deliver in usable form. It generates lactobacillus alongside Leuconostoc and Weissella strains with documented antimicrobial properties, meaning this drink was also protection against foodborne pathogens before refrigeration existed. The Maya didn't have a word for probiotics. But they had pozole. Number 13, Hasawa, fermented sorghum porridge. Across Sudan and the Horn of Africa, sorghum has been the primary grain for thousands of years. And the most important preparation of sorghum has never been simple porridge. It's been fermented porridge. Hasawa. Sorghum left to sour for several days before cooking. Sorghum contains tannins that inhibit digestive enzymes and reduce nutrient absorption. Fermentation breaks down those tannins, increases protein digestibility, produces riboflavin and folic acid, and increases free amino acid concentration, making the protein far more usable. In populations where protein and micronutrients were historically limited, fermented sorghum porridge was the difference between nutritional sufficiency and deficiency. Number 14, Chicha de Jora. The Inca Empire ran on this drink. Chicha de Jora is a fermented corn beer made from malted Andean corn. It ferments for several days to a week, developing lactobacillus and wild yeasts. In the Inca Empire it was sacred, offered to the sun, consumed at ceremonies, given to the laborers who built Machu Picchu. But it was also practical nutrition. Fermentation significantly increased B vitamin content, produced beneficial bacteria, and provided easily digestible calories at high altitudes where the body is under constant metabolic stress. Archaeological evidence places chicha production in the Andes at least 3,000 years ago. The tradition continues today in villages across Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador. Number 15, Film joke. Scandinavia. The long winters. The need to make dairy last for months when fresh milk was impossible. Film joke is a Swedish cultured milk product fermented at room temperature, no heated incubation needed, which made it extraordinarily practical in cold climates. Slightly sour, pourable, with a mild viscosity from bacterial exopolysaccharides. Swedish research has specifically examined filmjoke's effects on blood pressure. Multiple studies found that the peptides produced during fermentation, specifically IPP and VPP, have measurable blood pressure lowering effects comparable to low-dose ACE inhibitor medications. This is clinical research on a food Swedish families have eaten every morning for centuries. Number 16, Hacho miso, long-aged. Most people know miso as the pale, mild soup served before sushi. Made in weeks. Light and salty. That's fine. But it's not what the samurai of Okazaki Castle were eating. Hacho miso uses only soybeans, salt, and enormous cedar barrels weighted with river stones. Minimum 2 years of fermentation. Sometimes 3. The result is a near-black paste with a depth of umami so concentrated that a small amount transforms everything it touches. Extended fermentation produces higher concentrations of free amino acids, and generates melanoidins, antioxidant compounds with studied anti-inflammatory properties. The samurai who stored Hacho miso during wartime weren't just preserving food. They were maintaining a medicine that kept armies functional through sieges that should have broken them. Number 17, fermented black garlic. Take ordinary white garlic. Place it in controlled humidity and low heat, around 60 to 80 degrees Celsius. Leave it for 3 to 4 weeks. What comes out is black. Soft. Sweet. Deeply complex. With notes of balsamic and molasses and something so savory it barely resembles the sharp garlic you started with. The slow Maillard reaction converts allicin and allicin into S-allylcysteine, a water-soluble compound studied for cardiovascular protection, neuroprotection, and anti-cancer properties. SAC levels in black garlic are significantly higher and more bioavailable than in raw garlic. Antioxidant capacity measures roughly double that of fresh white garlic. 2 cloves a day. Eaten as they are or folded into a sauce or warm rice. Number 18, Kumis. Central Asia. The horseback civilizations that swept across the ancient world. Kumis, fermented mare's milk, sustained them. Thin and watery compared to cow's milk dairy, it ferments with lactic acid bacteria and yeast, producing both lactic acid and a small percentage of ethanol. The Scythians, the Mongols, and the nomadic peoples of the Eurasian steppe have been making it for at least 4,000 years. Marco Polo wrote about it. Hippocrates referenced fermented mare's milk medically. Mare's milk has a protein composition closer to human breast milk, more whey proteins, smaller fat globules. Combined with fermentation, it becomes extraordinarily easy to digest and has been studied for gastrointestinal disorders and metabolic conditions. Traditional Mongolian medicine classified it as both food and medicine. It kept an empire moving at the pace of horses across 1,000 miles of steppe. Number 19, Torshi, Persian pickled vegetables. 3,000 years of Iranian culinary history centered partly on the art of preserving vegetables in brine. Torshir, from the Persian word for sour, covers a family of fermented vegetable preparations: eggplant, cauliflower, garlic, beets, turnips, cucumbers, green tomatoes. Each one transformed through genuine salt brine fermentation, alive and probiotic, not vinegar-pickled shortcuts. Traditional torshir is made with herbs like tarragon and fenugreek that add their own bioactive compounds to the ferment. It is eaten in meaningful quantities at every Persian meal as the digestive counterbalance to a rich cuisine. Research has found lactobacillus and leuconostoc diversity comparable to kimchi, and the combination of diverse vegetables creates a phytochemical complexity that single vegetable ferments simply cannot match. Number 20, Poi, fermented taro. Hawaii. Before European contact changed everything. The native Hawaiian people built one of the most nutritionally complete food systems in the Pacific on a root they considered sacred. Taro. And specifically, fermented taro, poi. Raw taro contains calcium oxalate crystals that make it nearly inedible without proper processing. When cooked, taro is pounded and fermented for 1 to several days. Bacterial activity neutralizes the remaining irritants and transforms the nutritional profile. Fermented poi has significantly higher bioavailable iron than fresh taro. Its prebiotic fiber content increases. And it develops lactobacillus bacteria that have been studied for immune function effects. Hawaiian researchers have identified unique bacterial strains in poi fermentation not commonly found elsewhere, some demonstrating activity against common pathogens in laboratory settings. Native Hawaiians called taro the elder sibling of humanity. Modern science is beginning to understand what they meant. Closing. Every single one of these 20 foods shares something important. None of them require a laboratory. None need refrigeration during production. None were invented by a company or patented by a corporation. They were made by ordinary people in ordinary kitchens, fields, and clay pots across thousands of years. People who noticed that certain preparations made them stronger. That certain foods carried them through illness, through winters, through conditions that should have been fatal. The gut microbiome is not a new discovery. The idea that food heals you is not a trend. These civilizations were doing the work. The bacteria were doing the work. The fermentation was doing the work. You don't need a supplement to get what these foods offer. You need a jar. Some salt. Some patience. And the willingness to eat alive again. Your gut was built for this. Give it what it needs.